What if everything we believe about romantic choice is backwards? Modern dating culture tells us that attraction is mysterious, spontaneous, and ultimately inexplicable. That magical spark that either exists or doesn't. We swipe through profiles, attend singles events, and trust our gut reactions, believing that somewhere out there is our perfect match, waiting to be discovered through the alchemy of instant chemistry. But science reveals a more unsettling truth. We're not choosing our partners as much as we think we are. Our brains are running elaborate pattern-matching software, developed in the first few years of life, that determines who feels right to us decades later.
I was walking through ashes, the smoke still in my hair, carrying the weight of a world that didn't know I was there. But your voice cut through the silence, soft as a prayer in the night. And for the first time in forever, the dark gave way to light. I found love in the fire, in the ruins of all I knew, where the pain was still burning. I was carried home to you. Your touch is an old song, played on a broken string, rough around the edges, but it makes my spirit sing. I found love in the fire.
The attachment blueprint. Neuroscientists have discovered that our earliest relationships literally sculpt our neural pathways, creating what researchers call our attachment blueprint. This isn't just psychological theory, it's measurable brain architecture, the same neural networks that processed our relationships with caregivers become the template for evaluating romantic partners as adults. This explains why we can meet someone objectively wonderful, kind, stable, successful, and feel nothing. Meanwhile, someone who recreates familiar patterns of uncertainty, emotional unavailability, or drama can trigger intense attraction within minutes. Our brains aren't seeking what's good for us, they're seeking what's familiar. The paradox of chemistry. That overwhelming feeling we call chemistry. It's often recognition disguised as novelty. When we say someone gets us, or that conversation flows effortlessly, we're frequently encountering someone whose emotional patterns mirror our early experiences. The ease we feel isn't about compatibility, it's about unconscious familiarity. This creates a cruel paradox. The people who feel most natural to be with are often those who will recreate our earliest relationship dynamics, complete with their unresolved tensions and gaps. We're drawn to partners who will make us feel like children again, not in a playful way, but in recreating the same emotional landscapes we navigated growing up. The rejection of the too good. Perhaps most revealing is what happens when we encounter genuinely healthy potential partners. Many people report feeling bored by or suspicious of partners who are consistently emotionally available, communicative, and stable. These individuals often get labeled as too nice or lacking in mystery. This rejection isn't about preferring excitement over security. It's about our brains flagging unfamiliar emotional territories as potentially dangerous. If love in childhood came with conditions, anxiety, or emotional labor, then unconditional love in adulthood can feel foreign and untrustworthy. Breaking the code. The solution isn't to override our attractions entirely, an impossible task, but to become aware of the code our brains are running. This requires honest archaeology of our early relationships and the emotional patterns they established. Consider keeping an attraction audit. Note what specific qualities draw you to people and which ones repel you. Then trace these preferences back. Does your attraction to emotionally distant partners echo a parent who withheld approval? Do you find nurturing people boring because caregiving in your family came with strings attached? The goal isn't to pathologize our attractions, but to understand them as data rather than destiny. When we recognize that our type is more about neural programming than genuine compatibility, we can begin to make more conscious choices. Rewiring for better love. Remarkably, our brains remain plastic throughout life. We can develop new neural pathways, but only through deliberate practice and repeated exposure to healthier relationship patterns. This might mean consciously dating against type, staying curious about people who feel too stable, or working with a therapist to understand our attachment patterns. Most importantly, it means recognizing that the absence of immediate chemistry doesn't mean the absence of potential love. Some of the most satisfying long-term relationships begin not with fireworks, but with gradual recognition. The slow realization that this person sees you clearly, supports your growth, and creates a safe space for your authentic self to emerge. The goal isn't to eliminate the influence of our past, but to expand our capacity for different kinds of connection. When we understand the hidden architecture of our attractions, we become architects ourselves, capable of building love that serves our growth rather than simply our history. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung spent a lifetime peering into the hidden chambers of the human psyche, and what he discovered there would forever change how we understand the forces that draw us together and tear us apart. Jung revealed that beneath the conscious mind lies a vast underground ocean of memories, instincts, and patterns that shape our every choice, including, perhaps especially, our choice of whom to love. Chapter 1. The Template of First Love. The Architecture of Attachment. Before we spoke our first words, before we could walk or even hold our heads upright, we were learning the most important lesson of our lives, what it means to love and be loved. In the warm circle of our earliest relationships, usually with our parents or primary caregivers, we absorbed not just nourishment for our bodies, but the fundamental patterns that would guide our hearts for decades to come. Jung called this phenomenon the personal unconscious, a repository of experiences and impressions that, while forgotten by our conscious minds, continue to exert tremendous influence over our choices and reactions. The British psychoanalyst John Bowlby would later elaborate on this concept through his groundbreaking work on attachment theory, demonstrating that our earliest relationships create what he termed internal working models of love, blueprints that unconsciously guide our expectations and behaviors in all subsequent intimate relationships. Consider Maria, a successful architect in her 30s who finds herself repeatedly drawn to men who are emotionally unavailable. Her friends cannot understand why someone so accomplished and attractive consistently chooses partners who keep her at arm's length, who promise intimacy but deliver only glimpses of warmth followed by long stretches of distance. What Maria's friends cannot see, and what Maria herself only dimly perceives, is that she is following a template carved deep into her psyche during those crucial early years. Maria's father was a brilliant surgeon who worked 18-hour days and spoke primarily in the language of achievement and criticism. Love in her childhood home was something that had to be earned through perfect performance, and even then it was dispensed sparingly, like a precious resource that might run out if used too freely. The rare moments when her father's attention turned toward her with genuine warmth were intoxicating precisely because they were so infrequent. Her nervous system learned to associate love with scarcity, approval with anxiety, and intimacy with the electric tension of uncertainty. Now, as an adult, Maria's unconscious mind seeks to recreate these familiar dynamics. The men who offer her consistent affection and availability feel somehow wrong to her, too easy, too boring, lacking the particular charge that her psyche has learned to associate with real love. She is not consciously choosing to suffer. She is unconsciously choosing to feel at home. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the autonomous nature of the unconscious. These patterns operate independently of our conscious will, guided by their own logic and purposes. They are not inherently pathological. They represent the psyche's attempt to master experiences that overwhelmed us when we were too young and vulnerable to process them fully. The child who cannot make sense of inconsistent love creates strategies for navigating that inconsistency, and those strategies become encoded in the very structure of the personality. The grammar of early love. Every family has its own emotional grammar, unspoken rules about how feelings are expressed, which emotions are welcome, and what one must do to earn love and belonging. Some families speak fluent in the language of verbal appreciation and physical affection. Others communicate love through acts of service or shared activities. Still others express care through worry, protection, and the prevention of potential disasters. Jung observed that children are remarkably adept at learning whatever emotional language their families speak, even when that language is contradictory, painful, or incomplete. We adapt not just to our parents' strengths, but to their limitations, wounds, and unconscious conflicts. We learn to read subtle shifts in mood, to anticipate emotional weather patterns, and to shape ourselves into whatever form seems most likely to secure the love we desperately need. The tragedy is that these adaptations, so necessary for survival in childhood, often become obstacles to authentic intimacy in adulthood. The child who learned to be hypervigilant to a parent's moods may become an adult who cannot relax in relationships, constantly scanning for signs of displeasure or rejection. The child who discovered that emotional needs were met with impatience or dismissal may grow into an adult who struggles to articulate desires or feels ashamed of vulnerability. Dr. Susan Johnson, a leading researcher in the field of couples therapy, has demonstrated through decades of clinical work that our early attachment experiences create what she calls attachment injuries, wounds that continue to influence our behavior in intimate relationships long after we've forgotten their origins. These injuries are not necessarily the result of dramatic trauma or abuse. They can arise from well-meaning parents who were themselves shaped by their own unhealed wounds, from family systems under stress, or simply from the inevitable imperfections that characterize all human relationships. The revolutionary insight of Jung and the attachment theorists who followed him is that we carry these early relationship templates not as conscious memories, but as embodied patterns of expectation and response. They live in our bodies as much as our minds, manifesting as physical sensations of comfort or anxiety, attraction or repulsion, safety or danger. When we meet someone new, our unconscious mind immediately begins comparing them to these internal templates, seeking both familiarity and the opportunity to heal old wounds. The compulsion to repeat. One of Jung's most profound contributions to our understanding of human behavior was his recognition of what he called the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious tendency to recreate familiar relationship dynamics, even when those dynamics caused us pain. This compulsion operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, guiding our choices with a logic that often seems to work against our stated desires for happiness and fulfillment. The compulsion to repeat is not masochistic, though it may appear so from the outside. Rather, it represents the psyche's ongoing attempt to resolve unfinished business from the past. Every time we find ourselves in a familiar relationship dynamic, our unconscious mind hopes that this time, with this person, we might be able to heal the original wound or complete the interrupted developmental process. Consider James, a gentle and thoughtful man who consistently finds himself in relationships with women who are highly critical and demanding. His friends marvel at his patience with partners who seem to find fault with everything he does, from the way he loads the dishwasher to his career choices. What they don't understand is that James is unconsciously seeking to resolve his relationship with a mother who was never satisfied with his achievements, who always found something lacking in his efforts to please her. Each critical partner offers James an opportunity to finally win the approval that eluded him in childhood. His unconscious logic suggests that if he can just be good enough, loving enough, patient enough, he might finally earn the unconditional acceptance that was withheld in his earliest relationship. The tragedy is that he consistently chooses partners who, like his mother, are incapable of offering the approval he seeks. They are playing out their own unconscious patterns, perhaps seeking to resolve their own early experiences of feeling powerless or unheard. This dance of unconscious patterns meeting and triggering each other is what creates the particular intensity and confusion that characterizes so many romantic relationships. We are not simply falling in love with another person, we are falling into the complex interplay between our respective unconscious minds, each seeking to heal old wounds through the other. Jung believed that this compulsion to repeat would continue until we became conscious of the patterns themselves. Only through awareness could we begin to choose differently, to respond from our adult selves rather than from the wounded children who still lived within our unconscious minds. This process of making the unconscious conscious was, for Jung, the essential work of psychological development and the key to authentic intimacy. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the Unconscious Mind. The Personal and Collective Realms. To understand the forces that shape our romantic attractions, we must first explore Jung's revolutionary map of the psyche. Unlike Freud, who focused primarily on personal history and individual trauma, Jung discovered that the unconscious mind contains layers of experience that extend far beyond our personal biography. He distinguished between the personal unconscious, the repository of our individual experiences, memories, and forgotten impressions, and what he called the collective unconscious, a deeper realm containing the psychological patterns and archetypes shared by all humanity. The personal unconscious is like the basement of our psyche, filled with experiences that have been repressed, forgotten, or simply pushed out of conscious awareness. Here live our childhood memories, both pleasant and painful, our discarded dreams and ambitions, our unexpressed emotions and unacknowledged aspects of our personality. This realm directly influences our romantic choices, as we've seen in our exploration of early attachment patterns. But beneath this personal layer lies something far more mysterious and powerful, the collective unconscious. Jung described this as the deepest layer of the unconscious mind, containing what he called archetypes, universal patterns of human experience that have emerged over millennia of human evolution. These archetypes are not learned but inherited, not personal but transpersonal, not cultural but cross-cultural. The archetypal realm profoundly influences our experience of love and attraction. When we feel that mysterious sense of recognition upon meeting a stranger, when we experience love at first sight, when we find ourselves drawn to someone for reasons we cannot articulate, we are often responding to the activation of archetypal patterns within our unconscious minds. The Anima and Animus, inner partners. Perhaps nowhere is Jung's understanding of the archetypal realm more relevant to love than in his concepts of the anima and animus, the unconscious feminine aspect in men and the unconscious masculine aspect in women, respectively. These inner figures, formed through both personal experience and archetypal inheritance, serve as templates for what we seek in romantic partners. Jung observed that we each carry within us a contrasexual aspect of the psyche that represents our own unlived potentials and compensates for the conscious attitude we've developed. For a man who has emphasized logic, achievement, and emotional control in his conscious life, the anima may carry the rejected qualities of intuition, receptivity, and emotional expressiveness. For a woman who has cultivated independence, rational thinking, and assertiveness, the animus may embody the disowned aspects of protection, strength, and focused purpose. The profound insight is that we often fall in love not with the actual person before us, but with how that person activates and embodies our inner anima or animus. We project onto them the qualities we have not developed within ourselves, experiencing them as the missing piece that will make us whole. This projection can create the intoxicating feeling of having found our other half, but it also sets up a dynamic fraught with disappointment and misunderstanding. When Sarah first met David at a conference, she was immediately struck by his quiet confidence and methodical approach to problem solving. As someone who had always felt scattered and emotionally reactive, she found his steady presence deeply attractive. What she didn't realize was that she was falling in love with her own unlived potential for inner stability and focus. David was carrying the projection of her undeveloped animus, the inner masculine that could provide structure and direction to her creative but chaotic nature. Initially, this projection created a powerful sense of completion and attraction, But as their relationship deepened, Sarah began to feel frustrated when David couldn't read her emotions or respond to her need for spontaneity and emotional connection. She had projected onto him not just the stabilizing qualities she lacked, but also the responsibility for providing emotional attunement and intuitive understanding, qualities that actually belonged to her own inner feminine, her own capacity for emotional intelligence and receptivity. David, meanwhile, had been attracted to Sarah's spontaneity and emotional expressiveness, qualities he had suppressed in his own development toward professional success and emotional control. He had projected onto her his unlived anima, his capacity for joy, creativity, and emotional fluidity, but he soon became overwhelmed by her emotional intensity and confused by his own unexpected emotional reactions in her presence. This is the paradox of anima and animus projections. They bring us together by promising wholeness, but they also create distance by preventing us from seeing our partners as they actually are, rather than as carriers of our own unlived potentials. The shadow in love. Perhaps even more crucial to understanding our romantic patterns is Jung's concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, or simply never developed. The shadow contains not only our negative traits and impulses, but also our unrealized positive potentials. It represents everything we are not consciously willing to be, everything that contradicts our self-image and ego ideal. Jung made the startling observation that we are often most strongly attracted to people who embody aspects of our own shadow. This attraction can take two forms. We may be drawn to someone who expresses the positive qualities we have disowned, or we may find ourselves compulsively attracted to someone who embodies the negative traits we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The first type of shadow attraction explains why the responsible, disciplined person often falls for the free spirit, why the people pleaser is drawn to the rebel, why the overgiver finds themselves magnetized by someone who appears refreshingly selfish. These relationships offer the possibility of vicarious experience of our disowned potentials. We can experience freedom, rebellion, or healthy selfishness through our partner without having to challenge our own self-concept. The second type of shadow attraction is more troubling but equally common. The person who prides themselves on being honest and straightforward may find themselves repeatedly involved with manipulative partners. The individual who values kindness and consideration may be consistently drawn to selfish or cruel people. The recovering perfectionist may become involved with someone whose life is in constant chaos. These attractions are often puzzling and disturbing to the conscious mind, but they serve an unconscious purpose. By being in relationship with someone who embodies our disowned traits, we can maintain our conscious self-image while still having contact with the rejected aspects of our nature. The problem arises when we expect our partner to carry these projections indefinitely without recognizing that what disturbs us most about them often reflects something we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Jung's famous statement that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves finds particular relevance in romantic relationships. The qualities that most annoy us about our partners, the behaviors that trigger our strongest reactions, often point toward aspects of our own shadow that we have yet to integrate. Complexes, the autonomous actors within. Jung's discovery of psychological complexes provides another crucial piece in understanding the unconscious forces that shape our romantic lives. A complex is an organized cluster of thoughts, feelings, memories, and behaviors centered around a particular theme or experience. These complexes operate semi-autonomously within the psyche, often taking on a life of their own and hijacking our rational mind in moments of emotional intensity. We all have complexes. They are a normal part of psychological life. Common complexes include the mother complex, father complex, authority complex, and inferiority complex. These organize our experiences and reactions around specific themes and relationships, often operating below the threshold of conscious awareness until they are triggered by particular people or situations. In romantic relationships, the activation of complexes can create dramatic shifts in personality and behavior that surprise both partners. The usually confident and assertive person who becomes passive and childlike around authority figures may be experiencing the activation of a father complex. The independent and self-sufficient individual who becomes clingy and possessive in romantic relationships may be dealing with an activated abandonment complex. Understanding complexes helps explain why we can know intellectually what would be good for us in relationships, yet find ourselves consistently making choices that lead to pain and disappointment. When a complex is activated, it temporarily takes over the executive functions of the psyche, operating according to its own logic and emotional imperatives rather than our conscious values and intentions. The person with a strong rescuer complex may find themselves consistently attracted to partners who appear to need saving, even when their conscious mind recognizes the futility and exhaustion of such relationships. The individual with an abandonment complex may sabotage healthy relationships out of a desperate need to control the timing and circumstances of inevitable loss. Jung believed that complexes could never be completely eliminated, but they could be integrated and transformed through conscious awareness. By recognizing when a complex had been activated and understanding its historical origins and current purpose, we could begin to respond from our adult consciousness rather than from the wounded or incomplete parts of ourselves that the complex represents. Chapter 3: The Projection of Unlived Lives. The magnetism of the undeveloped self. One of Jung's most profound insights was his recognition that we are often most intensely attracted to people who embody the aspects of ourselves that we have not developed, our unlived lives, our road not taken, our suppressed potentials. This attraction operates like a psychological magnetism, drawing us toward what we unconsciously recognize as missing within ourselves. This phenomenon goes far beyond simple opposites attract. It represents the psyche's fundamental drive toward wholeness and completion. Jung believed that every individual contains within themselves the seeds of a complete personality, but the demands of family, culture, and survival require us to develop only certain aspects of our potential while leaving others dormant or rejected. These undeveloped aspects don't disappear. They remain alive in the unconscious, seeking expression and integration. Consider Eleanor, a successful corporate lawyer who has built her identity around logic, precision, and emotional control. She works 80-hour weeks, maintains an impeccable apartment, and has structured her life with military precision. Yet she finds herself inexplicably drawn to Marcus, a struggling artist whose studio apartment is cluttered with canvases, whose schedule is determined by inspiration rather than obligation, and whose emotional expressiveness both terrifies and fascinates her. What Elena experiences as mysterious romantic attraction is actually her psyche's recognition of her own unlived artistic and emotional potentials, the part of her that was discouraged from creative expression in childhood, the aspect of her nature that learned to suppress spontaneity and emotional authenticity in favor of achievement and approval, lives on in her unconscious. When she encounters Marcus, she is encountering a living embodiment of these suppressed aspects of herself. This type of attraction can create relationships of extraordinary intensity and mutual fascination. Elena feels vibrantly alive in Marcus's presence, as if she is finally in contact with parts of herself she had forgotten existed. Marcus, meanwhile, may be attracted to Elena's groundedness and sense of direction, qualities that his own artistic temperament has perhaps sacrificed in favor of creative expression. The relationship becomes a laboratory for mutual projection and vicarious experience. Through Elena, Marcus can experience the security and structure that his spontaneous nature has never developed. Through Marcus, Elena can touch the creative and emotional freedom that her controlled existence has sacrificed. Each partner becomes, in essence, a living symbol of the other's unlived life. The perilous beauty of compensation. Jung observed that the psyche naturally seeks balance through what he called compensation, the tendency for unconscious contents to emerge that balance or complete our conscious attitude. In relationships, this compensatory function often manifests as attraction to partners who embody what we lack or have rejected in ourselves. The person who has developed their thinking function at the expense of their feeling nature may find themselves drawn to highly emotional partners. The individual who has cultivated independence and self-reliance may be attracted to those who appear vulnerable and in need of care. The perfectionist may fall for the charming rebel who seems unburdened by rules and expectations. These compensatory attractions serve an important psychological function. They offer us contact with the rejected or undeveloped aspects of our nature, but they also create relationships fraught with tension and misunderstanding. We may find ourselves simultaneously attracted to and irritated by the very qualities that initially drew us to our partner. The thinking type who falls for the feeling type may initially be charmed by their partner's emotional spontaneity, but eventually become frustrated by their apparent lack of logic and consistency. The independent person who chose a dependent partner may feel both needed and burdened by their partner's reliance. The perfectionist may find their partner's rebelliousness exciting at first, but exhausting over time. This dynamic becomes particularly complex when both partners are seeking compensation through the other. Each becomes responsible not just for their own wholeness, but for carrying the unlived potentials of their partner. The relationship becomes a delicate dance of mutual projection and disappointment, fascination and frustration. Dr. Harville Hendricks, creator of Imago relationship therapy, has built upon Jung's insights to show how we unconsciously seek partners who can help us heal childhood wounds while also challenging us to grow beyond our current limitations. He describes this as seeking someone who is both familiar enough to feel like home and different enough to stretch us toward new possibilities. The crisis of withdrawn projections. The honeymoon phase of relationships, when each partner seems to embody everything the other has been seeking, represents the peak of mutual projection. Each person experiences their partner as the carrier of their missing pieces, their unlived potentials, their path to wholeness. This creates a temporary sense of completion and bliss that feels like the fulfillment of destiny itself. But projections cannot be maintained indefinitely. Reality has a way of intruding on our psychological fantasies. The partner we have idealized as the embodiment of our unlived creativity may reveal themselves to be disorganized and irresponsible. The person we projected our need for stability onto may turn out to be rigid and controlling. The individual who seemed to carry our capacity for emotional depth may prove to be moody and self-absorbed. When projections begin to withdraw, and they inevitably do, the relationship enters what Jung called the crisis of the withdrawn projection. This is often experienced as disillusionment, disappointment, or even betrayal. "This isn't the person I fell in love with," partners say, not realizing that they never fell in love with the actual person at all, but with their own projection upon them. This crisis represents a crucial turning point in relationships. Many couples cannot survive the withdrawal of their initial projections. The intense attraction that brought them together dissolves, leaving them with two separate individuals who may have little in common beyond their complementary psychological needs. They may part ways, each seeking a new partner onto whom they can project their unlived potentials, beginning the cycle anew. But the crisis of withdrawn projections also represents an opportunity for authentic love to emerge. When we can no longer project our missing pieces onto our partner, we are forced to confront the reality of who they actually are, complete with their own complexes, wounds, and limitations. We are also confronted with the reality of our own incompleteness and the necessity of developing within ourselves the qualities we had hoped to find in another. This is when relationship becomes a genuine vehicle for psychological growth rather than merely a source of compensation or completion. Instead of seeking to live vicariously through our partner's strengths, we must develop our own. Instead of expecting them to carry our unlived potentials, we must find the courage to live them ourselves. The successful navigation of this crisis requires what Jung called differentiation, the ability to separate our own psychological material from that of our partner, to own our projections and withdraw them consciously rather than simply becoming disillusioned. It requires developing the capacity to love another person as they are, rather than as a symbol of what we need them to be. The alchemy of mutual growth. When relationships survive the withdrawal of initial projections and enter the realm of conscious partnership, they can become what Jung described as alchemical vessels, containers for mutual transformation. The attraction that initially brought the partners together based on their complementary psychological needs can evolve into a conscious commitment to support each other's individual growth and integration. Elena and Marcus, whom we met earlier, provide an example of this evolutionary process. Initially drawn together by their complementary natures, her structure balancing his chaos, his creativity compensating for her rigidity, they eventually faced the inevitable crisis when their projections began to withdraw. Elena became frustrated with Marcus's inability to provide the stability she had projected onto him. Marcus felt suffocated by Elena's need for control and predictability. The relationship could have ended there, as so many do when the initial magic of mutual projection fades. But both Elena and Marcus had developed enough psychological awareness to recognize what was happening. Instead of blaming each other for not living up to their projections, they began the difficult work of owning their own unlived potentials. Eleanor began to explore her own creativity, taking painting classes and allowing more spontaneity into her structured life. Marcus started developing better organizational skills and took responsibility for creating more stability in his own existence. Rather than seeking these qualities in each other, they began cultivating them within themselves. This process was not easy or straightforward. It required each partner to face aspects of themselves they had long avoided or rejected. Elena had to confront her fear of imperfection and loss of control. Marcus had to acknowledge his anxiety about responsibility and commitment. But as they each became more whole individuals, their relationship transformed from one of mutual neediness to one of mutual appreciation and support. The great gift of conscious relationship is that it provides us with a safe container within which to explore and integrate our unlived potentials. Our partner becomes not the carrier of our missing pieces, but a witness and supporter of our own journey toward wholeness. The attraction we initially felt toward their embodiment of our unlived life can evolve into gratitude for their role in helping us discover and develop those qualities within ourselves. Chapter 4: The Dance of Masculine and Feminine Principles. Beyond Gender, the Eternal Principles. Jung's exploration of the anima and animus opened a window into understanding attraction that transcends biological sex and cultural gender roles. He recognized that within every individual, regardless of their sex, exist both masculine and feminine principles, universal aspects of human psychology that seek expression and balance. These principles are archetypal in nature, meaning they represent fundamental patterns of human experience that emerge across all cultures and historical periods. The masculine principle, as Jung understood it, embodies qualities such as focus, direction, structure, analysis, and the drive to achieve and penetrate. It represents the aspect of psyche that seeks to understand, categorize, and control the external world. The feminine principle encompasses receptivity, intuition, nurturing, emotional depth, and the capacity to hold and contain. It represents the aspect of psyche that seeks to connect, relate, and allow natural processes to unfold. These principles are not inherently tied to biological sex, nor are they value-laden hierarchies. Both are equally necessary for psychological completeness and effective functioning in the world. A person of any gender may have developed primarily masculine or feminine qualities in their conscious personality, while the complementary principle remains largely unconscious and undeveloped. This understanding revolutionizes how we think about romantic attraction. We are often drawn to partners who embody the principle we have less developed within ourselves. The person whose conscious personality is organized around masculine principles, goal-oriented, analytical, emotionally controlled, may find themselves magnetized by partners who embody feminine qualities, intuitive, emotionally expressive, relationally focused. Dr. Pat Allen, a relationship therapist who has worked extensively with Jung's concepts, observed that many modern relationship difficulties stem from confusion about these archetypal principles. In our contemporary culture, both men and women are encouraged to develop both masculine and feminine qualities, which is psychologically healthy. However, in intimate relationships, the dynamic interplay between these principles often creates attraction and polarity. The polarization of attraction. David Dider, a teacher who has applied Jungian principles to intimate relationships, describes how sexual and romantic attraction often depends on what he calls polarity, the dynamic tension between masculine and feminine energies. This polarity is not about rigid gender roles, but about the natural dance between direction and receptivity, structure and flow, focus and openness. When two people both operate primarily from the same principle, both highly focused and goal-oriented, or both highly receptive and intuitive, they may have wonderful friendships or partnerships, but lack the particular type of tension that creates passionate romantic attraction. Attraction often emerges from the recognition of and desire for what we have not fully developed within ourselves. Consider the relationship between Dr. Amanda Chen, a research scientist, and Jake Morrison, a massage therapist and meditation teacher. Amanda has spent her life developing her analytical mind, her capacity for linear thinking, and her ability to structure complex projects. Her professional success depends on her capacity to focus, analyze, and achieve concrete results. Jake, meanwhile, has cultivated presence, emotional attunement, and the ability to create healing spaces for others. His work requires sensitivity, intuition, and the capacity to respond to subtle, energetic, and emotional cues. Initially, Amanda was drawn to Jake's groundedness and emotional availability, qualities that her achievement-oriented lifestyle had little room for. Jake was attracted to Amanda's clarity of purpose and intellectual brilliance, capacities he had never fully developed in his more intuitive approach to life. Each felt completed by the other, as if they had found the missing piece of themselves. Their relationship thrived on this polarity. Amanda could relax her controlling tendencies and allow Jake to guide their emotional and spiritual connection. Jake could rely on Amanda's planning and decision-making abilities, while focusing on creating beauty and harmony in their shared life. The tension between her structured approach and his flowing responsiveness created a dynamic that felt both exciting and balancing. However, this type of polarized relationship also presents unique challenges. Amanda sometimes felt frustrated when Jake couldn't provide the type of intellectual companionship she valued. Jake occasionally felt unheard when Amanda's analytical mind dismissed his more intuitive insights. Each had to learn to appreciate the other's way of being without expecting them to provide everything they needed. The evolution of polarity. One of the most fascinating aspects of long-term relationships is how the polarity between partners can shift and evolve over time. Jung observed that psychological development often involves integrating previously rejected or undeveloped aspects of the personality. As individuals grow and mature, they may begin to develop the principle they had previously left undeveloped, which can significantly change the dynamics of their relationships. Amanda, after years of being in relationship with Jake, began to develop her own capacity for presence and emotional attunement. She started meditating, learned to listen to her body's wisdom, and became more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. Meanwhile, Jake began developing his own capacity for structure and goal setting. He started his own wellness center, learned business planning, and discovered his ability to organize and lead groups effectively. This mutual development enriched their individual lives, but also changed their relationship dynamic. The clear polarity that had initially attracted them began to blur as each partner developed aspects of both masculine and feminine principles within themselves. Some couples experience this as a loss of attraction or excitement. Others discover that their relationship evolves from one based primarily on compensation and polarity to one founded on mutual respect and shared growth. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development was what he called individuation, the process of becoming a complete individual who has integrated both masculine and feminine aspects within themselves. From this perspective, the purpose of romantic relationships is not to find someone who will complete us, but to provide a catalyst for discovering and developing our own wholeness. The most mature relationships become spaces where both partners support each other's individuation process. Instead of expecting their partner to carry the projection of their undeveloped principle, they use the relationship as a laboratory for developing greater completeness within themselves. The sacred marriage within. Jung wrote extensively about the sacred marriage or hieros gamos, the union of masculine and feminine principles within the individual psyche. He saw this internal marriage as the ultimate goal of psychological development, more important even than external romantic relationships. When we achieve this inner balance, we become capable of authentic love rather than projection-based attraction. The person who has integrated both their masculine and feminine aspects is no longer seeking completion through a romantic partner. They can appreciate and enjoy polarity with others without being dependent on it for their psychological wholeness. They can experience attraction without losing themselves in projection. They can love another person for who they are, rather than for what they represent of their own unlived life. This doesn't mean that such individuals no longer experience romantic attraction or desire intimate partnerships. Rather, their attractions are based more on genuine appreciation and less on unconscious neediness. They are drawn to partners not because they need them to provide missing psychological functions, but because they enjoy and respect who those people actually are. The concept of the inner sacred marriage also helps explain why some people seem to go through periods of their lives when they are not romantically attracted to anyone, or when they feel complete and fulfilled in their solitude. These may be periods when the individual is focusing on developing the inner relationship between their masculine and feminine aspects, preparing for more conscious and mature external relationships. Jung suggested that we alternate throughout our lives between periods of external focus, when we are developing ourselves through relationships with others, and periods of internal focus, when we are integrating and balancing the various aspects of our personality. Both phases are necessary for complete psychological development. The wisdom traditions have long recognized this concept of inner marriage. Tantric philosophy speaks of the union of Shiva and Shakti within the individual. Christian mysticism refers to the marriage between the soul and the divine. Taoist philosophy describes the balance of yin and yang as the source of harmony and power. When we understand romantic attraction through this lens, we can see our relationships as part of a larger journey toward inner wholeness. The people we are attracted to at different phases of our lives may represent different aspects of this inner marriage that we are learning to integrate. Our attractions become teachers, pointing us toward the aspects of ourselves that are ready to be developed and embraced. Chapter 5. The Wounded Healer: How Trauma Shapes Love. The architecture of trauma. To understand the full complexity of romantic attraction, we must venture into one of the most painful yet illuminating territories of human psychology: how early wounds and traumas continue to influence our adult relationships. Jung's concept of the wounded healer provides a profound framework for understanding how our deepest injuries often become the source of our greatest wisdom and our most compulsive attractions. Trauma, in the psychological sense, is not limited to dramatic events or obvious abuse. It encompasses any experience that overwhelmed our capacity to cope and make sense of what was happening to us. For children, whose nervous systems and psychological defenses are still developing, even relatively minor events can have lasting impact. The child who was regularly criticized by a perfectionist parent, the young person whose emotional needs were consistently dismissed, the adolescent who felt invisible in their family system, all carry within them the imprint of these early wounds. Jung observed that trauma creates what he called complexes, autonomous psychological structures that organize our experience around the original wound. These complexes don't simply store memories, they create entire worldviews, relationship patterns, and strategies for survival that continue to operate long after the original threat has passed. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research on trauma has shown that these early experiences literally reshape the developing brain, creating patterns of hypervigilance, emotional reactivity, and defensive strategies that become automatic responses to perceived threat. The child who learned that love was conditional upon perfect behavior develops internal alarm systems that activate whenever they sense disapproval or criticism from intimate partners. The young person who experienced abandonment or neglect creates strategies for either avoiding intimacy altogether or clinging desperately to relationships that feel precarious. What makes trauma's influence on romantic attraction so complex is that we are often drawn to partners who unconsciously remind us of our original wounders. This phenomenon, known as repetition compulsion, seems paradoxical. Why would we seek out relationships that might reactivate our deepest pain? Yet Jung understood this as the psyche's ongoing attempt to heal and integrate traumatic experiences. The magnetic pull of familiar wounds. Consider Sarah's story. Raised by an alcoholic father who alternated between charm and rage, she learned to become hyper-attuned to subtle shifts in mood and energy. Her survival depended on reading the emotional weather of adults around her and adjusting her behavior accordingly. She became expert at anticipating anger, diffusing tension, and taking responsibility for emotions that weren't hers to manage. As an adult, Sarah consistently found herself attracted to men who were emotionally volatile or struggling with addiction. Her friends couldn't understand why someone so intelligent and accomplished would repeatedly choose partners who seemed so obviously problematic. What they couldn't see was that these men felt like home to her nervous system. The hypervigilance that had been her childhood survival strategy now felt purposeless in relationships with stable, emotionally available men. With them, she felt anxious and unmoored, as if she had lost her primary way of feeling useful and connected. The volatile partners, however, activated all her well-developed skills for emotional management and crisis navigation. She felt competent and needed in ways that fed some deep hunger for purpose and identity. Her attraction to these men was not masochistic, but rather the unconscious recognition of a familiar psychological landscape where her adaptations could find expression and validation. This pattern illustrates what Jung called the autonomous nature of complexes. Sarah's trauma-based complex operated independently of her conscious will and rational mind. Even when she intellectually understood that these relationships were unhealthy, the complex continued to guide her attractions and choices according to its own logic and imperatives. Dr. Peter Levine, developer of somatic experiencing therapy, has shown that trauma lives not just in our memories, but in our bodies. The nervous system patterns established in childhood continue to influence our physical responses to potential partners. Sarah's body literally relaxed and felt more at home around the subtle signs of emotional instability that would send others running. Her trauma had created a template, not just for psychological attraction, but for somatic recognition and comfort. The dance of complementary wounds. One of the most intricate aspects of trauma's influence on romantic attraction is how our wounds often complement those of our partners, creating relationships that feel intensely meaningful and necessary to both parties. Jung observed that we tend to attract partners whose psychological complexes interlock with our own, creating systems where each person's wound is both triggered and temporarily soothed by the others. The relationship between Michael and Lisa illustrates this dynamic. Michael grew up with a mother who was overwhelmed by mental illness and frequently unable to provide consistent care. He learned to become hyper-responsible, always anticipating needs and crises before they occurred. His identity became organized around being the strong one, the problem solver, the person others could depend on in times of trouble. Lisa, meanwhile, was raised by parents who were emotionally distant and critical. She learned that her emotional needs were burdensome and that the safest strategy was to minimize her impact on others. She became expert at appearing independent while secretly longing for someone who would notice her unspoken needs and care for her without being asked. When Michael and Lisa met, they immediately recognized something essential in each other. Michael was drawn to Lisa's apparent self-sufficiency, which felt refreshingly different from the emotional chaos of his childhood home. Yet underneath her independence, he sensed a vulnerability that activated all his well-developed caretaking instincts. Lisa was attracted to Michael's stability and his intuitive ability to anticipate and meet needs, qualities she had never experienced in her family of origin. Their relationship initially felt like a perfect fit. Michael could express his identity as a caretaker without feeling overwhelmed because Lisa's needs were subtle and undemanding. Lisa could receive the care she had always craved without having to risk the vulnerability of directly asking for it because Michael was naturally inclined to anticipate and provide. However, this complementary wound system also created significant challenges. Michael eventually felt burdened by the responsibility of always having to guess Lisa's needs and feelings, especially when she couldn't articulate them directly. Lisa began to feel infantilized and controlled by Michael's constant caretaking. Yet she had never learned to advocate for herself or express her needs clearly. Each partner's wound was both soothed and exacerbated by the others. Michael's hyper-responsibility was validated by Lisa's understated neediness, but it also prevented him from ever relaxing or receiving care himself. Lisa's strategy of minimizing her impact was accommodated by Michael's anticipatory caretaking, but it also kept her trapped in a passive position where she couldn't develop her own voice and agency. The reenactment of unfinished business. Jung's understanding of repetition compulsion goes deeper than simple attraction to familiar patterns. He recognized that our unconscious mind continuously seeks opportunities to complete interrupted developmental processes and heal unfinished emotional business from the past. The relationships we create in adulthood often serve as elaborate therapeutic reenactments designed to work through and resolve childhood wounds. This process is neither conscious nor guaranteed to succeed. More often, relationships based primarily on complementary wounds become stuck in repetitive cycles that recreate the original trauma without resolving it. The partners may feel intensely connected and important to each other while simultaneously feeling frustrated and unfulfilled by the relationship's limitations. The key to transformation lies in what Jung called making the unconscious conscious. When partners can begin to recognize and understand their own trauma patterns and complexes, they create the possibility for healing rather than mere repetition. This requires developing what trauma therapists call dual awareness, the ability to experience emotional activation while simultaneously observing and understanding what is happening from a more objective perspective. For Sarah, healing began when she started to notice her physical responses to different types of men. She began to observe how her nervous system relaxed around emotional volatility and became anxious around stability. This awareness allowed her to pause and question whether her attractions were based on genuine compatibility or on the activation of old survival patterns. She began working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, learning to understand her hypervigilance as an adaptation that had served her well in childhood but was no longer necessary. She practiced staying present with the anxiety that arose around emotionally stable partners, recognizing it as her nervous system's unfamiliarity with safety rather than an indication that something was wrong. Michael and Lisa's healing required them to recognize and communicate about their complementary wound patterns. Michael had to learn to express his own needs and receive care from Lisa, rather than always being the provider. Lisa had to practice articulating her feelings and needs directly, rather than expecting Michael to intuit them. Both had to tolerate the discomfort of changing roles and patterns that had felt essential to their identities and connection. Post-traumatic growth in relationship. Jung believed that our greatest wounds contain the seeds of our greatest gifts. The hypervigilance that developed from early trauma can become exceptional emotional intelligence. The hyper-responsibility that emerged from childhood chaos can become genuine leadership and caregiving ability. The self-protection that developed from early emotional injury can become wise boundaries and discernment. When romantic relationships become conscious containers for healing rather than unconscious reenactments of trauma, they can facilitate what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the development of new capacities and strengths that emerge from working through difficult experiences. Partners can learn to use their relationship as a laboratory for healing, supporting each other in developing the capacities that were interrupted or distorted by early wounds. Sarah eventually learned to distinguish between genuine attraction based on compatibility and values, and compulsive attraction based on trauma reenactment. She developed the ability to feel safe with emotionally stable partners and to appreciate their consistency rather than finding it boring. Her early experiences with unpredictability had given her exceptional skills in crisis management and emotional attunement. As she healed, she was able to use these gifts in conscious and helpful ways rather than being driven by them compulsively. Michael and Lisa learned to create a relationship based on conscious choice rather than unconscious complementarity. Michael discovered that he could express his natural caregiving abilities without losing himself in hyper-responsibility. Lisa developed her own voice and agency while still being able to receive and appreciate care. Their relationship evolved from one based on mutual wounding to one based on mutual growth and support. The profound insight of Jung's approach to trauma and relationships is that our wounds need not define us, but they can inform us. When we understand how our early experiences continue to influence our adult attractions and choices, we can begin to respond from consciousness rather than compulsion. We can learn to recognize the difference between relationships that simply activate our familiar patterns and relationships that genuinely support our growth and healing. This doesn't mean that we should only seek partners who have perfectly resolved their own trauma or who present no psychological challenges. Rather, it means developing the capacity to engage consciously with the inevitable complexities and triggers that arise in intimate relationships, using them as opportunities for mutual understanding and growth rather than unconscious reenactment of old wounds. Chapter 6: The Cultural Shadow: How Society Shapes Our Desires. The collective unconscious in modern love. Jung's revolutionary insight extended beyond individual psychology to encompass what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological heritage of humanity that influences our deepest motivations and attractions. But this collective dimension of the psyche is not static. It is continuously shaped and reshaped by the cultural contexts in which we live. Our romantic attractions are thus influenced not only by our personal history and individual complexes, but also by the collective shadows and unintegrated aspects of our society. In contemporary Western culture, we inherit a complex and often contradictory set of messages about love, relationships, and sexuality. The ideology of romantic individualism tells us to follow our hearts and find our soulmate, the one person destined to complete us and fulfill all our emotional needs. Simultaneously, consumer culture commodifies romance, selling us products and experiences that promise to enhance our attractiveness and desirability. The digital age has further complicated matters by creating unprecedented options for meeting potential partners, while simultaneously fostering a culture of endless comparison and disposability. These cultural influences operate largely below the threshold of conscious awareness, shaping our expectations and desires in ways we rarely examine. We may believe we are making individual choices based on personal preferences, when in fact we are responding to collective programming about what we should want, how relationships should function, and what constitutes successful love. Dr. Eva Illouz, a sociologist who has extensively studied the intersection of emotion and capitalism, demonstrates how market logic has infiltrated our understanding of romantic relationships. We speak of shopping for partners, maximizing our relationship value, and maintaining multiple options to avoid settling for less than we deserve. This commodification of love creates a collective shadow around depth, commitment, and the patient work of building intimacy over time. The shadow of perfection. One of the most pervasive cultural shadows affecting modern romance is our obsession with perfection and optimization. Social media presents carefully curated versions of other people's relationships, creating impossible standards for comparison. Dating apps reduce potential partners to a few photos and bullet points, encouraging us to make snap judgments based on superficial criteria. The entire culture of self-improvement promises that if we just work hard enough on ourselves, we can become worthy of the perfect partner who will make us perfectly happy. This cultural emphasis on perfection creates a profound shadow. The parts of human experience that are messy, difficult, or simply ordinary become shameful and must be hidden. We learn to present idealized versions of ourselves while secretly fearing that our authentic selves are unlovable. We expect our partners to maintain impossible standards of attractiveness, emotional availability, and compatibility while struggling with our own ordinary human limitations. The perfectionism shadow in relationships manifests as chronic dissatisfaction and endless searching. No matter how wonderful our current partner might be, we remain aware of their flaws and limitations. We wonder if we might be settling, or if there might be someone better suited to us out there. The possibility of finding someone more attractive, more successful, more emotionally evolved, or simply more compatible keeps us from fully committing to the imperfect but potentially meaningful relationship in front of us. Jung understood that the pursuit of perfection is actually a defense against the anxiety and vulnerability of authentic intimacy. It is easier to maintain fantasies about ideal relationships than to do the difficult work of loving real people with their inevitable limitations and complexities. The cultural shadow of perfection thus serves to keep us perpetually seeking rather than truly finding. The repression of emotional depth. Modern culture also carries a significant shadow around emotional depth and psychological complexity. Despite the proliferation of therapy and self-help, our fast-paced, achievement-oriented society has little patience for the slow, non-linear process of emotional growth and healing. We are encouraged to move on quickly from disappointments, to get over past wounds, and to maintain positive attitudes regardless of our internal reality. This cultural repression of emotional depth creates attractions to partners who seem to promise easy happiness and uncomplicated connection. We may find ourselves drawn to people who appear to have figured it out, who seem free from psychological baggage or emotional complexity. Conversely, we may reject potential partners who appear too introspective, too willing to explore difficult feelings, or too honest about their own struggles and limitations. The shadow of emotional repression also manifests as attraction to partners who allow us to avoid our own psychological work. The person who refuses to look at their own patterns of attraction might consistently choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, ensuring that they never have to risk genuine vulnerability. The individual who fears their own capacity for anger might seek out passive partners who never challenge or confront them. Dr. John Gottman's extensive research on couple relationships has shown that the ability to engage constructively with conflict and negative emotions is crucial for long-term relationship success. Yet our cultural shadow around emotional difficulty often leads us to choose partners based on their ability to help us avoid rather than work through challenging feelings and situations. The commodification of intimacy. Perhaps nowhere is the cultural shadow more evident than in how market capitalism has influenced our understanding of romantic relationships. Jung would be deeply concerned about how the logic of consumption and exchange has penetrated our most intimate connections. We speak of partners as investments, relationships as projects to be optimized, and love itself as a commodity that can be enhanced through the right products, services, and self-improvement strategies. This commodification creates a fundamental confusion between having and being, between consumption and connection. We may find ourselves attracted to partners who enhance our social status or lifestyle, rather than those who truly understand and appreciate us. We may evaluate potential relationships based on what they can provide for us rather than what we might create together. The dating industry capitalizes on this commodified understanding of love by promising that the right techniques, strategies, or platforms will deliver the relationship we desire. Online dating, in particular, has created a marketplace mentality where potential partners are evaluated and discarded based on increasingly superficial criteria. The abundance of options that technology provides can paradoxically make us less capable of appreciating and committing to the imperfect but potentially wonderful person in front of us. Jung's concept of the participation mystique, the unconscious identification with collective values and assumptions, helps explain how these cultural shadows operate. We may unconsciously absorb the belief that we deserve to have all our needs met by a romantic partner, that love should be easy and consistently fulfilling, and that we should never have to compromise or sacrifice for the sake of relationship. The integration of cultural shadows. Recognizing and integrating cultural shadows around love requires the same process of conscious awareness that Jung advocated for personal psychological work. We must become aware of how collective assumptions and values are influencing our attractions, expectations, and relationship behaviors. This involves questioning messages we may have absorbed from media, family, peers, and society about what love should look like and how relationships should function. One powerful practice is to examine our own relationship history and patterns through the lens of cultural influence. What messages about love and partnership did we absorb from our families, communities, and broader culture? How have these messages shaped our attractions and expectations? Which of these influences serve our genuine well-being and growth, and which simply reflect unexamined cultural programming? The integration of cultural shadows also requires developing what Jung called cultural complex awareness, the ability to recognize when we are being driven by collective assumptions rather than individual consciousness. This might involve questioning why we feel we need to present a perfect image on social media, why we feel dissatisfied with a good relationship because we imagine others might be better, or why we expect our partners to fulfill needs that might be better met through community, friendship, or personal development. Dr. Thomas More, a Jungian analyst and author, suggests that healing our cultural shadows around love requires what he calls resouling our understanding of relationships. This involves moving away from the mechanistic, problem-solving approach that dominates our culture and toward a more organic, mysterious, and patient relationship with love itself. Resouling our approach to love means accepting that relationships are inherently complex, that attraction contains elements of mystery that cannot be fully analyzed or controlled, and that the deepest satisfaction in love comes not from getting what we think we want, but from engaging authentically with what we actually encounter. It means recognizing that the cultural promise of finding someone who will make us completely happy is not only unrealistic, but actually contrary to genuine psychological development. Real love, Jung understood, is not about finding completion in another person, but about two individuals supporting each other's journey toward wholeness. The wisdom of ancient patterns. As we work to integrate the cultural shadows that influence our romantic attractions, we can draw on the wisdom of archetypal patterns that have guided human relationships across cultures and throughout history. These ancient patterns, embedded in myths, fairy tales, and religious traditions, offer alternatives to the commodified and perfectionist approaches that dominate contemporary culture. The archetype of the sacred marriage, found in traditions worldwide, presents love as a spiritual path rather than a consumer experience. The archetype of the hero's journey suggests that relationships involve challenges and initiations that contribute to our growth and development. The archetype of the wise elder reminds us that lasting love is built through time, patience, and the gradual deepening of understanding and acceptance. By reconnecting with these deeper patterns while remaining conscious of contemporary cultural influences, we can begin to make choices about love that are both individually authentic and collectively wisdom-based. We can learn to appreciate the mysterious and uncontrollable aspects of attraction while taking responsibility for how we respond to and express our attractions. The integration of cultural shadows ultimately leads to what Jung called cultural individuation, the ability to participate consciously in our culture while maintaining individual awareness and choice. In the context of romantic relationships, this means being able to enjoy the benefits of contemporary opportunities for meeting partners and understanding relationships while not being unconsciously driven by cultural pressures and expectations. It means developing the capacity to love both personally and transpersonally, to engage authentically with individual partners while remaining connected to the larger patterns and purposes that relationships serve in human life and development. Chapter 7: The Dark Side of Love, Shadow Integration in Relationships. The unavoidable darkness. In the landscape of human love, Jung discovered territories that most prefer to leave unmapped, the dark forests where dwell our most primitive impulses, our capacity for cruelty, our hunger for control, and our deepest fears of intimacy. He called this realm the shadow, and he understood that no genuine relationship could achieve depth or authenticity without eventually venturing into these darker regions of the psyche. The shadow contains everything we cannot accept about ourselves, not just our obvious flaws and failures, but also our unrealized potentials, our unexpressed creativity, and our unlived possibilities. In romantic relationships, the shadow emerges through projection, jealousy, power struggles, and the inexplicable ways we can wound those we claim to love most deeply. Most relationship advice focuses on communication skills, compatibility, and positive psychology techniques. Jung's approach was radically different. He recognized that every individual carries within them the capacity for both love and hate, creativity and destruction, generosity and selfishness. Attempting to create relationships based only on our positive qualities while rejecting our darker aspects leads inevitably to psychological split and projection. When we refuse to acknowledge our own shadow, we inevitably project it onto our partners. The woman who cannot accept her own capacity for anger finds herself attracted to explosive men who can express the rage she has disowned. The man who rejects his own vulnerability and neediness becomes critical and contemptuous of these qualities in his partner. The person who has identified completely with being nice and understanding may find themselves involved with someone who seems cruel and selfish, carrying the projection of their own rejected capacity for healthy selfishness and direct communication. The phenomenon of psychological inflation. Jung observed that romantic love often begins with a state he called psychological inflation, a condition in which we temporarily lose touch with our ordinary human limitations and imagine ourselves to be more than we actually are. Falling in love can create a sense of specialness, destiny, and transcendence that lifts us above the mundane concerns of daily existence. This inflation is not inherently pathological. It serves important psychological functions. It provides the energy and motivation necessary to take the risks inherent in intimate relationship. It temporarily dissolves the boundaries and defenses that might otherwise prevent deep connection. It allows us to experience ourselves as capable of extraordinary love, generosity, and transformation. However, inflation also creates a dangerous split between our conscious, idealized self-image and our unconscious shadow. When we are inflated by romantic love, we tend to see ourselves as purely loving, generous, and evolved beings who have transcended ordinary human jealousy, neediness, and selfishness. We may believe we are incapable of deliberately hurting our beloved, or that our love is different from the petty, conflicted relationships we observe in others. This inflation inevitably leads to what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for any extreme psychological state to eventually transform into its opposite. The person who begins a relationship believing they are incapable of jealousy may discover depths of possessiveness that shock and shame them. The individual who prides themselves on being evolved and spiritual may find themselves capable of manipulative or cruel behavior that contradicts their self-image. The deflation that follows romantic inflation can be devastating if it is not understood as a natural and necessary part of psychological development. When our shadow begins to emerge in the relationship, when we discover our capacity for pettiness, control, or cruelty, we may feel that we have failed or that the relationship is doomed. Actually, this emergence of the shadow represents an opportunity for genuine intimacy and self-knowledge that was impossible during the inflated phase. The intimate dance of power and control. One of the most challenging aspects of shadow integration in relationships involves acknowledging and working with issues of power and control. Jung recognized that every individual has both a need for autonomy and a desire for connection, both a wish to influence and a need to surrender. These conflicting drives create ongoing tension in intimate relationships that can either destroy partnership or deepen it, depending on how consciously it is navigated. The shadow around power often manifests as unconscious strategies for controlling our partners. These strategies may be subtle and appear benevolent. The person who controls through excessive caregiving, the individual who manipulates through emotional fragility, the partner who uses intellectual superiority to maintain dominance. Because these control strategies are often unconscious and may even be motivated by genuine love and concern, they can be particularly difficult to recognize and address. Dr. Pia Melody's work on codependency has illuminated how many people unconsciously attempt to control their partner's emotions, behaviors, and choices as a way of managing their own anxiety and insecurity. The person who cannot tolerate their partner's sadness may compulsively try to cheer them up. The individual who fears abandonment may use guilt and emotional manipulation to prevent their partner from pursuing independent interests or friendships. These control dynamics create what Jung called psychological fusion, a state where the boundaries between self and other become blurred and each partner becomes overly responsible for the other's emotional state. Fusion prevents the individuation that is necessary for both psychological health and genuine intimacy. Working with power and control dynamics requires developing what Jung called conscious suffering. the willingness to tolerate the anxiety and helplessness that arise when we cannot control our partner's choices, emotions, or responses to us. This involves learning to hold the tension between our need for connection and our partner's need for autonomy, between our desire to help and their right to their own experience. Jealousy as shadow teacher. Perhaps nowhere is the shadow more visible in relationships than in the experience of jealousy. This most primitive and painful of emotions reveals aspects of our psyche that we would prefer to keep hidden: our possessiveness, our insecurity, our capacity for rage and revenge, our fear of being replaceable or insufficient. Jung understood jealousy not as a character flaw to be eliminated, but as a powerful teacher that reveals important information about our unconscious attachments and vulnerabilities. Jealousy shows us where we have become psychologically fused with our partner, where we have made their love essential to our sense of worth and identity, where we have projected our own unlived potentials onto them rather than developing these capacities within ourselves. The person who experiences intense jealousy around their partner's friendships may discover their own undeveloped capacity for social connection. The individual who becomes enraged when their partner admires someone else's attractiveness may be confronting their own rejected relationship with beauty and sensuality. The partner who cannot tolerate their loved one's professional success may be facing their own unlived ambitions and creative potentials. Working with jealousy consciously involves what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. This means neither acting out jealous impulses destructively nor repressing them completely, but rather sitting with the uncomfortable feelings and exploring what they reveal about our own psychological landscape. This process requires developing the capacity for what psychologists call mentalization, the ability to understand that both we and our partners have complex internal states that may not be immediately visible or comprehensible. Jealousy often arises from primitive assumptions about our partner's motivations and feelings. Learning to question these assumptions and communicate about them directly can transform jealousy from a destructive force into an opportunity for deeper understanding and intimacy. The shadow of idealization. Another significant aspect of the relationship, shadow, involves our tendency to idealize our partners, especially in the early stages of romance. While idealization can provide the energy necessary for deep bonding, it also creates a dangerous split between the perfect partner we imagine and the flawed human being we are actually in relationship with. Jung recognized that idealization is a form of projection, where we attribute to our partner qualities that we have not developed within ourselves or that we wish we possessed. The person we fall in love with becomes a screen onto which we project our own unrealized potentials, our spiritual aspirations, and our fantasies of perfection. The shadow of idealization emerges when our partner inevitably fails to live up to our projections. They reveal themselves to be human, sometimes selfish, sometimes confused, sometimes wounded or scared or petty. If we have invested too heavily in our idealized image of them, this revelation of their humanity can feel like betrayal or deception. The healthy integration of this shadow aspect involves what Jung called withdrawing projections. Consciously recognizing the ways we have attributed to our partner qualities that actually belong to our own potential development, instead of being disappointed when our partner proves to be human, we can appreciate their authentic personality while taking responsibility for developing within ourselves the qualities we had projected onto them. This process transforms idealization into genuine appreciation. Instead of loving our partner for how they make us feel about ourselves or for how they fulfill our fantasies, we can love them for who they actually are, complete with their strengths and limitations, their growth edges and their areas of mastery. Sacred containers for shadow work. Jung believed that committed relationships, when approached consciously, could serve as sacred containers for mutual shadow work. The safety and continuity of long-term partnership creates the conditions necessary for revealing and integrating aspects of ourselves that might remain hidden in more casual relationships. This process requires what he called mutual individuation, the commitment of both partners to their own psychological development and to supporting each other's growth, even when that growth is uncomfortable or challenging. It means agreeing to see each other's shadow aspects with compassion rather than judgment, to use conflicts and difficulties as opportunities for deeper understanding rather than evidence that the relationship is wrong. The couple who can navigate shadow integration successfully develops what Jung called psychological resilience, the capacity to hold increasing complexity and contradiction without losing their essential connection. They learn to love each other not despite their flaws and limitations, but including them, recognizing that wholeness requires embracing both light and dark aspects of the human personality. This work is not easy or comfortable. It requires enormous courage to see ourselves clearly and to allow ourselves to be seen clearly by another. It demands the willingness to confront aspects of our personality that we have spent years trying to avoid or change. But it also offers the possibility of profound intimacy, the experience of being known and loved, not for our persona or idealized self-image, but for our complete and authentic humanity. The integration of shadow in relationship ultimately leads to what Jung called psychological marriage, a union based not on projection and fantasy, but on genuine understanding and acceptance of two complete individuals who have learned to love each other's totality rather than just their appealing aspects. Chapter 8: The Individuation Journey, Growing into Wholeness Through Love. The Call to Become Whole. At the heart of Jung's understanding of human psychology lies perhaps his most profound insight. We are each called to become complete individuals, integrating all aspects of our personality into a coherent and authentic whole. He called this process individuation, and he recognized that intimate relationships could serve as powerful catalysts for this essential developmental journey. Individuation is not about becoming independent or self-sufficient in the conventional sense. Rather, it is about becoming truly individual, discovering and expressing our unique combination of capacities, perspectives, and purposes. It involves differentiating ourselves from the collective identities and expectations we have absorbed from family, culture, and society, while simultaneously developing our capacity to participate consciously in relationship and community. Jung observed that most people spend the first half of their lives developing what he called the persona, the mask or social identity that allows us to function effectively in the world. We learn to emphasize certain aspects of our personality while suppressing or rejecting others. We adapt to the expectations and demands of our families, educational systems, and career paths. This process is necessary and healthy, but it inevitably involves sacrificing aspects of our authentic nature. The individuation journey of the second half of life involves reclaiming and integrating these rejected or undeveloped aspects of ourselves. This process often begins with a crisis or transition that reveals the limitations of our persona-based identity. A successful career may leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled. A marriage based on conventional expectations may begin to feel constraining and inauthentic. The roles and identities we have constructed may no longer provide the meaning and vitality they once offered. Intimate relationships play a crucial role in this individuation process because they inevitably activate the aspects of ourselves we have kept hidden or undeveloped. Our partners serve as mirrors, reflecting back to us both our conscious qualities and our unconscious potentials. They challenge our comfortable identities and call forth capabilities we may not have known we possessed. The mirror of intimate relationship. Dr. Harville Hendrix, whose imago relationship therapy builds extensively on Jungian principles, describes romantic partners as agents of healing who unconsciously activate our growth edges. We are attracted to people who will challenge us to develop the very qualities we most need to integrate for our wholeness and happiness. The person who has over-identified with intellectual analysis may be drawn to a partner whose emotional intelligence challenges them to develop their feeling function. The individual who has built their identity around independence and self-reliance may find themselves in love with someone whose vulnerability calls forth their capacity for nurturing and interdependence. The partner who has always been the responsible, stable one may be attracted to someone whose spontaneity and playfulness activates their own unlived creative potentials. These attractions are not accidental or based merely on personal preference. They represent the unconscious wisdom of the psyche, which seeks completion and wholeness through relationship with others who embody what we have not yet developed within ourselves. Consider the relationship between Dr. Rachel Martinez, an emergency room physician, and Tom Chen, an elementary school teacher. Rachel had spent her adult life developing her capacity for quick decision-making, emotional control under pressure, and analytical problem-solving. She was competent, respected, and successful, but she had little access to the gentler, more nurturing aspects of her nature. Tom, meanwhile, had built his career around patience, empathy, and the ability to create safe spaces for learning and growth. He was beloved by his students and colleagues for his kindness and emotional availability, but he struggled with assertiveness and had difficulty making decisive choices in challenging situations. Their attraction to each other was immediate and profound. Rachel was drawn to Tom's emotional wisdom and his capacity to create peaceful, nurturing environments, qualities she had never developed in her high-pressure medical career. Tom was fascinated by Rachel's clarity, competence, and ability to remain calm in crisis situations, capacities he had never cultivated in his gentle, accommodating approach to life. Initially, their relationship served a compensatory function. Rachel could relax and be cared for in ways she had never allowed herself. Tom could feel protected and guided by Rachel's strength and decisiveness. Each provided the other with access to their own unlived potentials through the mechanism of projection and vicarious experience. The crisis of individuation. However, as their relationship deepened and the initial projections began to withdraw, both Rachel and Tom faced what Jung called the individuation crisis. They could no longer rely on each other to provide their missing psychological functions. Rachel could not depend on Tom to be responsible for all the emotional attunement and nurturing in their relationship. Tom could not continue to look to Rachel to make all the difficult decisions and provide all the strength. This crisis manifested as conflict and disappointment. Rachel became frustrated when Tom couldn't provide the decisive leadership she had projected onto him. Tom felt overwhelmed when Rachel expected him to match her emotional control and professional competence. Each began to see the other's limitations and humanity rather than their idealized projections. Many relationships end at this stage when the partners realize they cannot depend on each other for psychological completion. The attraction that brought them together, their complementary strengths and weaknesses, begins to feel like incompatibility. They may seek new partners onto whom they can project their unlived potentials, beginning the cycle of projection and disappointment anew. But Rachel and Tom chose a different path. Rather than ending their relationship or blaming each other for failing to live up to their projections, they began the difficult work of individual development within the context of their partnership. Rachel started exploring her own capacity for gentleness and emotional nurturing, taking art classes and learning to create spaces of beauty and peace in her own life. Tom began developing his assertiveness and decision-making abilities, taking leadership roles in his school, and learning to trust his own judgment in difficult situations. This process was challenging and uncomfortable for both of them. Rachel had to confront her fear of vulnerability and her belief that showing gentleness meant weakness. Tom had to face his anxiety about conflict and his deep-seated belief that assertiveness meant hurting others. But as each partner began to develop their previously rejected qualities, their relationship transformed from one of mutual dependency to one of mutual appreciation and support. The sacred marriage within. Jung's ultimate vision for psychological development was what he called the sacred marriage, not just the union between two people, but the integration of masculine and feminine principles within each individual. This inner marriage represents the achievement of psychological wholeness, where we no longer need to seek completion through others, but can offer our fullness to relationship. When individuals achieve this inner integration, their capacity for authentic love expands exponentially. They can appreciate and enjoy their differences with others without needing those differences to compensate for their own incompleteness. They can experience attraction and connection without losing themselves in projection and fantasy. They can love others for who they are, rather than for what they represent of their own unlived life. The sacred marriage within also transforms our understanding of romantic attraction itself. We begin to recognize that our deepest attractions often point toward aspects of ourselves that are ready to be developed and integrated. The person we cannot stop thinking about may be showing us qualities we are called to cultivate within ourselves. The relationship that feels meant to be may be offering us exactly the challenges and opportunities we need for our next stage of growth. Conclusion: the transformation of love. As we reach the end of our journey through the depths of attraction and love, we find ourselves in a place far different from where we began. The simple romantic notion of following our hearts has revealed itself to be a complex interplay of personal history, archetypal forces, cultural influences, and unconscious projections. Yet this complexity does not diminish the mystery and beauty of love, it deepens it. Jung's great gift to our understanding of human relationships was his recognition that love is simultaneously personal and transpersonal, individual and archetypal, conscious and unconscious. We are not just falling in love with another person, we are participating in the eternal human dance between wholeness and fragmentation, known and unknown, conscious and unconscious. The attractions we feel, the relationships we create, and the conflicts we encounter all serve the larger purpose of our psychological development and spiritual growth. Every person we love teaches us something essential about ourselves. Every relationship, whether it lasts a season or a lifetime, contributes to our journey toward becoming complete and authentic human beings. This understanding transforms our relationship to love itself. We can cease the exhausting search for the perfect partner who will complete us, and instead embrace the ongoing adventure of becoming whole individuals capable of authentic intimacy. We can stop trying to avoid the challenges and difficulties of relationship and instead welcome them as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. We can release ourselves from the cultural pressures to find happiness through romantic love and instead use our relationships as laboratories for developing greater compassion, wisdom, and understanding. We can move beyond the alternating cycles of idealization and disappointment that characterize so much modern romance and into the deeper satisfactions of conscious partnership. The path Jung illuminated is not easy. It requires courage to face our shadows, wisdom to withdraw our projections, and patience to support both our own and our partner's individuation journey. But it offers something far more valuable than the temporary high of romantic infatuation: the possibility of love that includes and transcends the personal, that serves both individual wholeness and collective healing. In learning to love consciously, we participate in the great work of human evolution, the ongoing development of our capacity to see clearly, feel deeply, and connect authentically with others. We become agents of healing not only for our own wounds, but for the collective wounds that have been passed down through generations. We help create the relationships and families and communities that can nurture the full flowering of human potential. Jung believed that the ultimate purpose of individual psychological development was not personal happiness, but service to life itself. In becoming whole, we become capable of genuine love. In learning to love authentically, we contribute to the healing and evolution of human consciousness. In understanding the deep patterns that govern our attractions and relationships, we free ourselves and others from the unconscious repetition of old wounds and limitations. This is the true alchemy of love, not the magical thinking that promises effortless happiness, but the patient work of transformation that turns the lead of our unconscious patterns into the gold of conscious relationship. It is work worthy of our highest aspirations and deepest commitment. It is work that serves not only our personal fulfillment, but the evolution of love itself. The journey into the shadow of love reveals that what we have always sought in another, wholeness, completion, unconditional acceptance, can only be found within ourselves. But paradoxically, it is often through the mirror of relationship that we discover and develop these inner capacities. Love remains mysterious, but it need no longer be unconscious. Attraction continues to move us, but we need no longer be moved unconsciously. In understanding the depths from which our attractions emerge, we liberate ourselves to love more fully, more authentically, and more consciously. We transform from unconscious seekers of completion into conscious partners in the great work of becoming whole. And in that transformation, we discover that love is not just a feeling or an experience, it is a path, a practice, and a sacred calling that can illuminate and transform every aspect of our human existence. Epilogue: Love as Sacred Practice. As we close this exploration into the depths of human attraction and love, we stand at the threshold of a transformed understanding. What began as an inquiry into the forces that draw us to certain faces in crowded rooms has revealed itself to be nothing less than a map of the soul's journey toward wholeness. Jung's revolutionary insight that we do not fall in love with people as they are, but as they appear to the constellation of forces within our unconscious minds, need not diminish the magic of love. Instead, it invites us into a deeper magic, the conscious participation in our own psychological and spiritual evolution through the sacred laboratory of intimate relationship. The journey we have taken together through these pages mirrors the journey that love itself asks of us. We began in the simple world of romantic attraction, moved through the complex territories of projection and shadow, descended into the underworld of trauma and cultural conditioning, and emerged in the realm of conscious relationship and individual wholeness. This is the path that love itself offers us if we have the courage to follow it fully. We have discovered that our attractions are never random or merely personal. They arise from the deepest wisdom of the psyche, calling us toward the people and experiences we need for our continued growth and development. The person who breaks our heart teaches us about our capacity for resilience and self-love. The partner who triggers our deepest wounds offers us the opportunity to heal patterns that may have shaped our family for generations. The relationship that challenges our comfortable identities calls forth aspects of ourselves we never knew existed. This understanding transforms suffering into meaning, conflict into opportunity, and disappointment into wisdom. It asks us to see every relationship, whether brief or lifelong, harmonious or difficult, fulfilling or frustrating, as part of a larger curriculum in becoming fully human. It invites us to approach love not as consumers seeking satisfaction, but as students in the University of Consciousness. The practical implications of this understanding are profound. When we recognize that our attractions point toward our own unlived potentials, we can begin to develop these capacities within ourselves rather than seeking them exclusively in others. When we understand that our relationship conflicts often arise from projected shadows, we can use these conflicts as opportunities for self-discovery rather than evidence of incompatibility. When we see that our partners cannot complete us but can support our journey toward completion, we can love them for who they are rather than for what we need them to be. This path requires enormous courage. It asks us to face aspects of ourselves we would prefer to keep hidden, to feel feelings we have spent years avoiding, to question assumptions we have held as fundamental truths. It demands that we expand our identity beyond the narrow confines of our persona and embrace the full spectrum of our humanity, including our capacity for both creation and destruction, love and hate, wisdom and foolishness. But this path also offers rewards beyond our current imagination. It promises the development of authentic selfhood, the capacity for genuine intimacy, and the ability to love without losing ourselves in projection and fantasy. It offers the possibility of relationships that serve not just our personal happiness, but our deepest growth and the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung believed that individuals who achieved psychological wholeness served as healing agents in the collective unconscious, contributing to the psychological evolution of humanity as a whole. In learning to love consciously, we participate in this great work. We help create the template for relationships based on mutual growth rather than mutual neediness, individual authenticity rather than codependent fusion, conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. The children who grow up witnessing such relationships inherit a different template for love. One based on wholeness rather than woundedness, presence rather than projection, consciousness rather than compulsion. They learn that love is not something that happens to them, but something they participate in creating through their own psychological and spiritual development. As we move forward from this exploration into the living laboratory of our own relationships, we carry with us new eyes for seeing, new tools for understanding, and new possibilities for loving. We know now that the person who captures our attention across a crowded room may be calling us not just toward romance, but toward our own unlived life. We understand that the partner who frustrates us most deeply may be reflecting back aspects of ourselves we have yet to integrate. We recognize that the relationship that challenges us most completely may be offering us exactly what we need for our next stage of growth. This knowledge does not make love easier. If anything, it makes conscious relationship more demanding than unconscious attraction, but it makes love infinitely more meaningful, more transformative, and more aligned with our deepest purpose as human beings. It transforms love from a commodity we seek to a capacity we develop, from an experience we have to a path we walk, from a feeling that overwhelms us to a practice that transforms us. In his later years, Jung wrote that the greatest tragedy of human life was not suffering, but meaninglessness, the sense that our experiences serve no purpose beyond immediate pleasure or pain. The understanding we have explored in these pages offers profound meaning to every aspect of our romantic lives. Every attraction, every relationship, every conflict, every loss serves the sacred purpose of our continued evolution toward wholeness and authentic love. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, whose insights were deeply influenced by Jung's work, wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." In the context of love, this means that all our relationship difficulties, all our problematic attractions, all our patterns of projection and repetition are invitations in disguise, opportunities for the beauty and courage of conscious transformation. The dragon of our compulsive attraction to unavailable partners may be the princess of our own capacity for independence and self-love. The dragon of our tendency to control and manipulate in relationships may be the princess of our ability to trust and surrender. The dragon of our fear of intimacy may be the princess of our capacity for authentic vulnerability and connection. Each dragon we face in the realm of love offers us the possibility of claiming another aspect of our wholeness. Each pattern we make conscious and transform contributes to our individual healing and to the healing of the collective wounds around love and relationship that have been passed down through generations. This is the ultimate gift of Jung's approach to understanding love. It reveals that our most personal struggles serve transpersonal purposes, that our individual healing contributes to collective transformation, and that our journey toward authentic love participates in the ongoing evolution of human consciousness itself. The path of conscious love is not for the faint of heart. It requires everything of us: our courage, our honesty, our willingness to grow beyond our current limitations, our commitment to seeing clearly even when clarity is uncomfortable. But it offers everything in return: authentic selfhood, genuine intimacy, meaningful relationship, and the deep satisfaction of aligning our personal choices with the evolutionary impulse of life itself. In learning to love consciously, we participate in the greatest adventure of human existence, the ongoing creation of new possibilities for connection, intimacy, and mutual growth. We become pioneers in the territory of authentic relationship, explorers of the furthest reaches of human potential for love and understanding. This is your invitation and your calling. The mystery of love that has guided you to these pages continues to beckon you forward, not toward easy answers or simple solutions, but toward the magnificent complexity and potential of conscious relationship. In accepting this invitation, you join the ranks of those who have chosen to transform love from unconscious compulsion to conscious art, from personal satisfaction to sacred service, from temporary experience to lifelong practice. The journey continues, and love, conscious, authentic, transformative love, awaits your full participation. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Gustav Jung. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Rumi. Love is not something we have, but something we are. Not something we get, but something we give. Not something that happens to us, but something we learn to embody more fully with each passing day.